Joining me from Nairobi, Kenya is Dr. XN Iraki, economist and associate professor of economics and business administration. Thank you so much for joining me, Dr. Iraki. So since 2001, we've seen that just 4 countries have implemented the free movement protocols meant to be used by at least 21 member states. So let's start from there. What are the issues that have kept other countries like an Egypt, a Malawi, a Rwanda, Ethiopia even, and more from implementing these protocols?
I think it's interesting because when you talk about trade, it's not about movement of goods, it's about people. So if you have to bring more trade among countries, then there must be free movement of people from country A to country B or from region A to B. But I think when COMESA came into being, it could have done better than it has. But I guess one of the reasons is political will. The countries signed into COMESA, but there wasn't enough political will to implement it. There also wasn't enough investment, for example, in roads, in highways, and so on. And very important, a lot of countries make a lot of money from customs. So if you remove that, if you keep that free movement, it means that countries have a source of income. So one way to ensure that there is more movement of goods or more free movement of goods is to make sure that countries look for alternative sources of funds apart from customs duties.
So for the countries that we see have implemented the protocols, Burundi, Kenya, Rwanda, and Zimbabwe, what do you think was possibly the driving force? Because you said this is not necessarily about the movement of goods, it's more about the movement of people, which can sometimes be controversial, especially around Africa and the border situation and even neighbors and territorial issues. And as we're also seeing, security issues as well. But what would you say was the driving force for those countries to go ahead and implement the protocols? And have they gained anything from having these protocols implemented in their countries?
Out of what there was political will, and 2, those countries have really benefited from free movement of goods and services. Remember that if you have free movement of goods and services, then you want to compete. You want to compete with imports. You want to compete with neighboring countries. So in the long run, you become a more competitive country, and the level of trade should go up. So if other countries can do the same, then we are going to fight Africa becoming a more competitive. We are going to fight COMESA becoming more competitive. We are going to start producing higher quality goods. We are going to find more people moving from one country to another. And when people move from one country to another, it's not just bodies of people moving. They bring new ideas. They catalyze the entrepreneurship culture where they come, and they bring new ideas. So the more people move, the more enterprising countries become, and the more trade we expect, and the more jobs we expect in the long run. So those countries have benefited in that way.
So you've listed out the advantages, because with these 21 countries, there's some 500 million people and a cumulative GDP of around 800 billion. So when you see these advantages, you just have to ask again, 20 years later, why is it only 4 out of 21 countries that have moved forward? In terms of the arguments that or maybe the questions that the other countries have, do you think there is one that's really a viable reason to slow down, to take 20 years, or to even pause on moving forward? So we're seeing the push now. The EU is involved, the African Union is involved in trying to push this forward as well. But at the end of the day, these are individual countries that must decide that this is what they want to do. If we're seeing all these advantages, is it short-sightedness that's stopping people from really jumping on board the potential?
As an economist, I'm surprised because the gravity theory of trade tells you that you trade more with your neighbors. So you find that the countries that neighbor one another always trade more. Kenya, Uganda, Switzerland, and Germany, you trade more. So I would have expected that the COMESA countries would have been the foremost. They would have been very excited. They would have been very motivated to make sure there's free movement of goods. And if you look at the other regional blocs like European Union and NAFTA, and in any other region you can think about, they have been growing for the last 21 years. European Union has done very well. So we should also have done the same. Probably the reason is that we don't see the long-term benefits of such cooperation, of such free movement of goods and services. We are narrow-minded, thinking just about our country and our own interests. So if only these countries talk in a more global perspective, I think COMESA would have done better than it is, instead of just looking internally.
So let me follow up with that, because some would even say that there's a potential argument that many of the countries that are parts of the COMESA trade bloc possibly do not see the importance of actual trade partnerships among the countries, or making sure that this 21 member bloc is as solid as possible. Do you think that's a potential, that there's more interest in these one-on-one, one-to-two bilateral agreements and even bilateral agreements with outside countries like the UK as well as the US than actually solidifying what COMESA stands for?
I think you have to remember that before COMESA came into being, all those countries were having trade, were doing a lot of trade with their former colonial masters. So you find that if you go to West African countries that were under France, there's more trade with France. If you go to countries that were under Britain, there's more trade with Britain. So COMESA did not find an empty trading regime. COMESA found some wrong traditions of trading. So it was very hard now to remove all those trading partnerships and then replace it with COMESA. So the countries were trading with others, bilateral or with their former colonial masters, and that had to be replaced with COMESA. If you look at things like communication between the two countries, infrastructure, if you look at the trade agreements they had, if you look at the culture, you could not replace that immediately. So it will take a long time before we start having free movement of goods. We have air transport between the countries. We find low transport between those two countries. And the countries and the people in each country start to realize that they benefit more from neighboring countries of trading with each other as opposed to looking inside. Even the education we give in school need to change. So people start realizing that there's more potential beyond the borders than within the borders. So it is taking some time, but it's taking too long.
So before we go on a break, let's look again at the key points of the protocol, and that's the eventual relaxation and elimination of visa requirements in this particular trading bloc. And that really does look good on paper, but you can see some of the issues happening between the countries right now that make it seem almost difficult. We know, of course, the situation with Rwanda and Uganda. We also look at South Africa's immigrant worker policy. At the end of the day, do you think this is still a pipe dream that's in the pipeline, or is there actual feasibility and viability in expecting that the trade bloc will eventually be able to get rid of visa requirements?
I think that is a valid dream. I'm always amused when I see Americans taking a flight to go to UK, they don't need a visa. If they're coming, let's say, from a certain European country to another country, you don't need a visa. So you just take a plane and go. And that facilitates trade, and that facilitates a lot of tourism and movement of goods and services. So I think it's a valid dream, but I think we need to actualize it. I think in Africa, we have never realized how important it is to freely move from one country to another without visa. At the end of the day, and I'll say it again, it is not the goods and services, it is the people, their ideas, their dreams and aspirations. And what you find from research is that most of the time, immigrants drive new ideas. US is a very progressive country because it is very open to immigrants. They bring new ideas. So when you allow Africans to move from one country to another, they bring new ideas. They catalyze the economy. They become entrepreneurial. They see things in a different perspective. And the moment we appreciate that, is the only time we are going to see our blocs working as expected and expanding trade and creating jobs for fellow Africans, as far as I'm concerned.
All right, Dr. Iraki, we're going to move on to the next point of the conversation, but that will be after this break. We'll look at how COMESA also fits into the larger conversation around the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement and a few other points in terms of the objectives of the COMESA trade bloc. The conversation will continue right after this. You're watching Business Edge. My guest today is Dr. Exen Iraki, economist and associate professor of economics and business administration. We're looking at COMESA's renewed push to get the free movement protocols implemented by more than just 4 countries in the bloc. Now, another COMESA objective is the harmonization of a customs union where customs duties will be eliminated between the merged territories. Dr. Iraki, where is the trading bloc when it comes to this, particularly given that if this does come to actualization, a lot of these countries will lose some of the revenue that comes from customs duties and taxes. So where are we along in sort of the schedule and the timeline and the conversation?
It's very interesting because if you look at the revenue streams of most African countries, a lot of money comes from customs. And that, in my opinion, is looking at things the wrong way. Those countries need to become more enterprising so that if they expand the level of business, the level of trade within the countries and outside the country, you can get more money, more revenue, for example, from VAT, value-added tax, because there will be more business, be more trade in service and goods, and by extension, you can get alternative sources of revenue. So let's think outside the box. Let's not just look at the customs. Let's encourage entrepreneurs to come up with new ideas, become more innovative, start new enterprises, and that will be alternative sources of revenue, including income from taxes when people work and have jobs. So let's think beyond customs. You see a lot of expansion of African economies.
Interesting enough, some believe that COMESA could be a test case for how the African Continental Free Trade Area agreements will really flow in the coming years. And it's something that people think we should look at to see the issues that the bloc has had to forestall any problems we think the area's agreements may have in the future. What do you think about that? Can we sort of juxtapose what's happening with COMESA with the potential for maybe where AFTA could be sometime?
It's not just lessons from COMESA, it's lessons from East African community. Lesson from ECOWAS, lesson from any other regional blocs or trading blocs we have had in Africa. Let's learn the lessons from them. What mistakes did they make? What were the success cases? What could have been done better? And in fact, if you get lessons from the current trading blocs, the ones that have been successful, the ones that have failed, then Africa free trade area will do much better than we expect. So let's learn from the past so that we can make the future brighter.
So let me stay on that, because for the African Continental Free Trade Area ratification, there are 12 COMESA member states. Is there any concern about overlap in terms of potential responsibilities and protocols, or do you think in the long run, a larger continental trade agreement like AFTA makes something like a COMESA trade bloc work even better?
I think there's a lot of duplication. I know one or two countries that are members of COMESA, members of SADC, members of the East African community, members of ECOWAS, and so on. In my opinion, countries should not be members of so many trading blocs. It is administratively very expensive. Sometimes the objectives of trading blocs conflict with one another. So I think what we should do is learn from the current trading blocs and then focus all our energy on Africa free trade area. The bigger market has bigger potential, and I think that's where the dream of Africa lies. Not just regional free small trading blocs, but we focus on bigger picture, which is Africa free trading area that is going to bargain with the rest of the world, so that as soon as we are through with African free trade area, now we can bargain with the rest of the world. We can see now the world as our market beyond Africa. That is a valid dream, in my opinion.
Okay. COMESA used to be a bit bigger than it is now, but between 1997 and 2007, you had countries like Lesotho, Mozambique, Tanzania, Namibia, and Angola all actually relinquishing their membership of the bloc. When you look at some of their reasons for leaving, do you think the reasons are valid? Have they been addressed? And have they been better off for actually leaving the trade bloc? Or is it time for us to start seeing some of these countries looking to re-enter COMESA?
I think if those countries were seeing real benefits of being members of COMESA, none of them would have left. And it is because of those teething problems that they probably say, let's go away and do other things. And I don't think they have suffered a lot by leaving COMESA. So what we want to see is real benefits from COMESA, real benefits from the African community, real benefits from African free trade area, so that any member who joins sees the benefits. If you look at, for example, East African community, we used to be 3 countries. Now DRC has come, Rwanda has come, Burundi has come, and Southern Sudan has come, because they are seeing the benefits of that. So let COMESA present benefits to their members, and nobody is going to leave. In fact, you see more members coming in.
And finally, let me leave you with this question, or I believe you'll leave me with the answer. So this push wants to get more of the COMESA member states to implement the free movement protocols. Right now, it's just 4 countries. Do you think that's something we're going to see happen before the end of this year, or it's still going to continue to be a long road? I won't even say when we'll get to all 21, but even just to have an additional 2, 3, or 4 more countries implementing the protocols. What do you think will happen between now and the end of the year?
I think that's a good question, because everybody now is talking about African free trade area. Should those countries join African free trade area or implement the protocols of COMESA? My argument is, since they are members of COMESA, let them implement the protocols, let them have free movement of goods and services, but that should not stop them from preparing for the African free trade area, which is a bigger dream, which is what will make Africa a real trading bloc. So let them, I don't know how long it is going to take, but they should implement, but they should not lose of the African free trade area dream.
All right, so we'll leave it at that for now. Professor Xen Iraki, thank you so much for joining me, and do have a pleasant weekend.
Thank you, and have a good weekend too.
All right. And of course, the conversation is one of overlap, as my guest has said. There is COMESA, there's SADC, there's the East Africa Community, there's ECOWAS, and there's still the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Agreements. Many have pointed out the duplication in some of the protocols, responsibilities, and duties. But in the long run, the idea is to make sure there's a free movement for Africans across the continent. Small businesses and medium-scale businesses benefit, and at the end of the day, the markets on the continent also benefits. You're watching Business Edge. Remember yesterday I told you we had some great news? You'll find out what it is after the break. Before we get to the big news we have for you on Business Edge, let's give you a few stories we're keeping our eyes on. And we start in the eastern part of the continent, where Kenya has cancelled the issuance of a 115 billion shilling or $1 billion euro bond, and will instead borrow from a syndicate of banks after the Treasury received bids priced at 12%. Nigerians traded at least 77.75 billion naira, that's around $185 million worth of Bitcoin in the first 3 months of the year, despite the Central Bank of Nigeria's restrictions on cryptocurrency transactions in the country. Eskom Holdings Limited has announced that it will provide a 39.9 billion rand loan to the transmission unit, which will be called the National Transmission Company of South Africa as it starts operating independently. The loan will ensure that it can finish projects and remain financially viable. And finally, as Shanghai locks down 7 districts this weekend to mass test millions as COVID-19 cases continue to emerge in the community, WTI for July delivery dropped to $120.78 a barrel on the New York Mercantile Exchange in Singapore earlier this morning, while Brent for August settlements fell to $122.26 a barrel on the ICE Futures Europe Exchange. And now to our big news. Starting on Monday, Business Edge is going to 1 hour at 11 a.m. West African time. So make sure you tune in throughout the week. We'll be kicking you off on Mondays with personal finance, calling it Money Monday, because we all could use a little bit more in our pockets. We'll be looking at what the tech world holds for us, and of course the African tech space as massive and as potential that it does have. We'll be focusing on women in business across the continent as well. And even though crypto may be banned in a few places, the conversation around cryptocurrency is big on the continent as well, and we'll be having that. And wrapping things up throughout the week with, of course, Stock Market Watch. It's something you don't want to miss. There's a little bit of something for everyone as Business Edge goes to 1 hour on Monday. So make sure you tune in. And of course, you know how to find us. You go to our social media timelines. We are at News Central TV. Download our mobile app. Go to YouTube and subscribe. Head to our websites. And of course, watch us on all the platforms we are available. Until a very special Monday, do have a pleasant weekend. I'm Tolulope Adeleru-Balogun.